In the heart of a bustling marketplace, where merchants shout their prices and buyers haggle for the best deals, an old monk sits quietly beneath a banyan tree. His robes are worn, his sandals covered in dust, yet something about him commands attention. He speaks no words, makes no grand gestures, and yet, as the minutes pass, the chaos around him begins to settle. The merchants lower their voices, the hurried footsteps slow, and even the restless wind seems to pause. No one knows his name. No one knows why he is there, but his presence alone is enough to shift the energy of the entire space. This is true power. Not the kind that demands attention, not the kind that comes from shouting the loudest or proving oneself in battle. This is the power of stillness, of presence, of a mind so unshaken that even the storm around it has no choice but to yield. But how does one cultivate such a presence? How does a person become so unwavering that even their enemies hesitate before challenging them? The answer lies not in aggression nor in dominance, but in something far more profound: mastery over oneself. The ancient Stoics understood this, and long before them, the Buddha taught it. True strength does not come from controlling others. It comes from controlling your own mind, your own emotions, your own reactions. When you stop being ruled by external forces, when you are no longer a puppet to the opinions, insults, or threats of others, you become truly untouchable. Imagine standing before your greatest adversary, and instead of reacting to their words, their mockery, their attempts to shake you, you remain unmoved, not out of arrogance, not out of stubbornness, but because you see through it all. Because you understand that their power over you only exists if you allow it. In this story, we follow the journey of Master Tenzin, a Buddhist monk who has faced the storms of life without ever raising his voice. He has encountered anger, betrayal, and opposition, yet he has never been shaken. He has mastered the art of silent strength, and through his lessons you will learn how to cultivate this same presence. By the end of this story, you will understand how to command respect without uttering a single word, how to remain calm even when provoked, how to let your actions speak louder than any insult, how to walk through life with the quiet confidence of a mountain, unshaken by the passing storms. The world does not need another loud voice demanding attention. It needs individuals who can stand firm in their truth, unaffected by the noise around them. Are you ready to become one of them? If this resonates with you, stay until the end of this story, and if you find value in these teachings, consider supporting this channel. Your presence here means everything, and together we can cultivate a world where strength is no longer measured by force, but by the stillness of a mind at peace. Now, let us begin. Master Tenzin once traveled through a small village known for its hostility toward outsiders. The people there were suspicious, hardened by years of conflict, quick to anger and slow to trust. As he walked through the main square, a group of young men, seeing his humble robes and calm demeanor, decided to test him. "You, old man," one of them sneered, stepping into his path. "What makes you so wise? Do you think you're better than us?" Tenzin did not stop walking, nor did he change his expression. He simply stepped aside, continuing forward, as if the man had been nothing more than a breeze passing through the air. Another young man, irritated by his silence, grabbed his sleeve. "We're talking to you," he said, his voice rising. The marketplace grew quiet, eyes turning toward the scene unfolding. Still, Tenzin remained unshaken. He met the young man's gaze, not with defiance, not with fear, but with something far more unsettling: complete stillness. There was no flicker of anger, no trace of anxiety, nothing for the young man to push against. It was as if he had reached into the depths of a river, expecting to grasp something solid, only to find water slipping through his fingers. The group expected a reaction. They wanted a show of weakness, an outburst, some evidence that their taunts had landed, but the more they provoked, the less they received. Frustration grew on their faces, while Tenzin remained as immovable as the mountain behind the village. Finally, an elder in the crowd stepped forward. He had been watching closely, seeing what the young men could not. He placed a hand on one of their shoulders and said, "Do you not see? He is not ignoring you. He simply does not belong to you. His peace is his own, and no matter how much you try, you cannot take it from him." Hearing this, Tenzin gave a small bow of acknowledgement, then continued on his way, untouched by the storm that had tried to reach him. That night, as the village settled into quiet, one of the young men sat by the fire, unable to forget what had happened. How was it possible for someone to remain so unshaken in the face of provocation? He had always believed that power came from dominance, from forcing others to react, yet today he had witnessed a different kind of power, the kind that made him feel small not through words or violence, but through sheer undeniable presence. Control over others is an illusion. The only real control is over oneself. When someone insults you, mocks you, tries to provoke you, they are handing you an invisible rope, hoping you will pull. But if you refuse to engage, the rope falls to the ground, useless. Your composure becomes your shield, and your silence, more deafening than any retort, becomes your greatest strength. Mastery over emotion is not suppression. It is understanding that nothing external has the power to move you unless you allow it. The moment you realize this, you will no longer be a puppet to the world. You will become something far more powerful, a force beyond manipulation, a presence that commands respect without demanding it. Tenzin never needed to prove his strength. He simply was. Years ago, Master Tenzin was invited to a great gathering of scholars, warriors, and noblemen in a distant kingdom. The hall was filled with the sound of animated discussions, the clinking of goblets, and the laughter of men boasting of their victories. Yet the moment Tenzin stepped inside, something imperceptible shifted. He did not announce his arrival. He did not seek to impose himself on the conversation. He simply walked with deliberate, unhurried steps, his posture straight, his hands folded, in front of him. His presence alone was enough to turn heads. Conversations faltered. Some lowered their voices without realizing why. Others instinctively straightened their backs, suddenly aware of the way they had been slouching. At the center of the room sat a general, a man known for his fiery temper and his demand for unquestioned respect. He watched Tenzin with a smirk, unimpressed. "A man who does not speak loudly must have nothing to say," he remarked to those around him, his voice carrying across the room. Laughter followed. Tenzin said nothing. He met the general's gaze with quiet confidence, his expression neither hostile nor submissive. He did not react to the laughter. He did not feel the need to explain himself. He simply existed in his strength. The general, expecting at least a flicker of defensiveness, leaned forward. "Tell me, monk," he continued, "do you not speak because you fear being challenged?" Tenzin smiled, then slowly walked toward an oil lamp flickering on the table. Without a word, he cupped his hand around the flame, casting a shadow that stretched across the wall. The room fell into silence, waiting for an explanation. Finally, Tenzin spoke, his voice steady, measured, deliberate. "The sun does not announce its presence, yet all living things turn toward it. The river does not boast of its depth, yet it carves through mountains. Strength is not in volume, nor in the demand for recognition. It is in the undeniable truth of what one is." His words hung in the air like an echo, sinking into the minds of those present. Even the general, who had spent his life asserting his power through force, found himself leaning back, suddenly aware of the weight of his own armor, the effort it took to be constantly proving oneself. That night, long after the gathering had ended, the general found himself staring into the quiet darkness of his chamber, unable to forget the presence of the man who had said so little, yet had commanded so much. He had faced warriors, kings, and adversaries, but never had he felt so unarmed as he had in front of a man who had done nothing but stand firm in himself. True confidence does not beg to be noticed. It does not shout for validation. It simply is. When you carry yourself with certainty, with quiet dignity, the world has no choice but to take notice. The strongest presence is not the one that demands attention, but the one that makes others feel their own noise by comparison. The village had long been divided. For years, two rival families had fought over a stretch of land, each claiming it as their own. Every attempt at negotiation had ended in anger, and though no blood had been shed, the hatred between them ran deep. No traveler passing through the village could avoid hearing the arguments, the accusations, the endless threats of retribution. One day, Master Tenzin arrived. He did not come as a judge nor as a mediator. He simply walked to the contested land and sat at its center beneath a gnarled old tree. The villagers, curious about the presence of a silent monk in the middle of their war, gathered around to see what he would do. At first, he did nothing. He sat in meditation, his face calm as the wind moved through the fields. Then, after some time, he stood, took a small shovel, and began to dig. The villagers whispered among themselves. "What is he doing?" someone asked. "Has he come to divide?" The land himself. But Tenzin did not mark borders. He did not stake a claim. He simply dug into the earth, planting seeds one by one. He carried water from the river, tending to the soil with quiet diligence. He worked from sunrise to sunset, never speaking, never justifying his actions. At first, the villagers mocked him. "A foolish old man," one of the rival leaders scoffed. "Does he think planting flowers will settle a war?" But still, Tenzin continued. Day after day he returned, caring for the small sprouts that began to push through the soil. He did not ask for help. He did not explain his intentions. He only acted. And then something began to shift. The children of the village, curious about his work, started to help him water the plants. Then the women, who had grown weary of endless arguments, began bringing baskets of food for the monk, who labored in silence. Finally, even the men, first one then another, picked up tools and started working the land beside him. Weeks passed, and the field that had once been a battleground flourished with green shoots and vibrant blossoms. The two rival families, who had once only come to this land to shout and accuse, now stood side by side, tending to what had grown. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, one of the family leaders approached Tenzin. "You never spoke a word," he said, "and yet you have resolved what no argument could." Tenzin smiled, wiping the dirt from his hands. "Words are easy," he said simply. "But what we do, that is what endures." A lesson had been planted along with the seeds. No decree, no debate, no force had ended the feud. It was action, quiet and unwavering, that had transformed the land and the people alike. A river does not announce its course. It simply flows, carving its way through stone over time. The strongest force in the world is not the one that demands attention, but the one that moves forward with purpose, without seeking approval, without waiting for permission. Let your actions speak so loudly that no words are needed. Master Tenzin arrived at a new village just as a dispute was unfolding in the town square. A man, red-faced with anger, was shouting at a merchant, accusing him of dishonesty. The crowd watched with a mixture of fascination and discomfort as the merchant, flustered and defensive, tried to argue back, his voice rising to match the intensity of his accuser. But no explanation seemed to satisfy the man's rage. The more the merchant spoke, the angrier his opponent became. Tenzin observed the scene for a moment, then quietly took a seat on the steps of a nearby well. He said nothing, did nothing, simply sat in the shade as the argument continued. Not long after, another man, a known troublemaker in the village, noticed the monk's presence and decided to test him. He walked up to Tenzin and stood over him smirking. "Tell me, old man," the troublemaker sneered, loud enough for others to hear, "what wisdom can you offer with that silence of yours? Or are you just another useless monk who does nothing but beg for food?" Tenzin did not answer. He did not even look up. His breathing remained steady, his expression unchanged. Annoyed, the troublemaker stepped closer. "Do you hear me? Or have you grown deaf from all those years of staring at the ground?" His voice grew harsher. "Or perhaps you are too much of a coward to speak." Still, Tenzin gave no reaction. The troublemaker's smirk began to falter. He had insulted many people in his life, and they had always responded, some with anger, some with embarrassment, some with excuses. But this old monk gave him nothing to push against, nothing to fuel his insults. The silence was suffocating. Finally, frustrated, he spat at the ground near Tenzin's feet and stormed away, muttering curses under his breath. A young villager, who had been watching with great curiosity, approached Tenzin. "Master," he asked. "Why did you let him speak to you that way? Why did you not put him in his place?" Tenzin smiled gently. "If someone offers you a gift, but you do not accept it, to whom does the gift still belong?" The young man thought for a moment. "To the one who offered it," he replied. Tenzin nodded. "The same is true of anger, insults, and hatred. When we do not accept them, they remain with the one who gives them. They do not become ours." The young man looked toward the troublemaker, who was still fuming in the distance, and suddenly understood. The man had not won anything. He had only exhausted himself like a storm raging against a mountain, only to realize the mountain does not move. That night, the village spoke not of the troublemaker's insults, but of the monk who had not been shaken by them. And in the days that followed, more and more villagers began to understand the lesson hidden in his silence. To react is to be controlled. To remain unmoved is to be free. When faced with anger, the strongest response is often no response at all. A flame without fuel must eventually die out. Master Tenzin once found himself in the court of a powerful lord, a man known not only for his wealth, but for his ability to manipulate those around him. The lord had built his influence not through kindness or wisdom, but through knowledge. Secrets he gathered, weaknesses he uncovered, desires he exploited. No one who stood before him could hide their true nature for long, and no one who revealed too much ever walked away without becoming a pawn in his game. Tenzin had been summoned under the pretense of counsel, but he knew better. This was not an invitation, it was a test. The Lord wanted to see if the monk could be unraveled, if his wisdom could be turned into something useful, if his silence could be broken. Seated upon his grand dais, the Lord studied Tenzin with a sharp gaze. "Tell me, Master," he began smoothly, "what is it that you seek in life? Every man desires something, even a monk." Tenzin bowed his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "I seek only to understand the nature of things," he said, simply. The Lord smiled, as if pleased with the answer, but his eyes betrayed his impatience. "And yet understanding is not enough to sustain oneself. Surely there is something you long for. Comfort, recognition, perhaps even enlightenment." Tenzin remained quiet for a moment before responding. "A tree does not ask the wind where it blows, nor does it reveal where its roots may lead. It simply stands." The hall grew silent. The courtiers, who were accustomed to watching their lord dismantle the confidence of those before him, now watched with fascination. The monk had given an answer, and yet he had given nothing at all. There was no ambition to grasp, no vulnerability to exploit, no desire to manipulate. The Lord's smile faded just slightly. He leaned forward. "Surely there is something," he pressed, "a past you long to forget, a dream you wish to fulfill, a fear you carry." Tenzin met his gaze with steady calm. "If a man holds a cup of water, believing it to be wine, he will drink with expectation. If he holds wine, believing it to be water, he may drink without care. But if he does not know what is in the cup, he must be cautious with every sip." The Lord exhaled softly, leaning back in his chair. He understood now. This man was not like the others. He could not be read, could not be controlled, could not be turned into a piece upon the board. A man without obvious wants, without exposed fears, was a man beyond his reach. Tenzin gave a respectful bow. "You have been most generous, my lord," he said, "but I fear there is little I can offer you." The Lord waved a hand, dismissing him. Yet as the monk left, a thought lingered in the nobleman's mind, a seed of unease he could not shake. In all his years of power, he had never feared a man who carried a sword, nor one who wielded influence. But he now realized there was something far more dangerous, a man who could not be predicted. A secret held is a power preserved. To reveal everything about yourself is to offer the world the tools to shape you, to control you. The less others know of your desires, your fears, your limits, the less they can use them against you. Be like the still water of a deep lake, its surface calm, its depths unknowable. Let the world wonder, and in that mystery you will always remain beyond its grasp. In a distant monastery nestled between the mountains, Master Tenzin took in a new disciple, a young man named Ren. Unlike the other students, who practiced patience and discipline, Ren was eager to prove himself. He wanted to be known, to be admired, to be respected. More than anything, he wanted the world to recognize his wisdom before he had even acquired it. One morning, as they walked along the temple grounds, Ren turned to Tenzin and said, "Master, I have a plan to improve the monastery's irrigation system. It will bring more water to the fields, allowing the crops to thrive. The villagers will see the change and know that I was the one who made it happen." Tenzin nodded but said nothing. Seeing no reaction, Ren pressed on. "I will speak to the elders today. I will gather the workers, instruct them on what needs to be done, and by next season, this place will be more prosperous than ever." Tenzin simply continued walking. Ren furrowed his brow. "Do you not think it is a good idea, Master?" Tenzin finally stopped and turned to face him. "Come with me," he said. He led Ren to a quiet pond where dragonflies skimmed the water's surface. Tenzin picked up a stone and held it in his palm. "Tell me, Ren," he said, "if I throw this stone into the pond, what will happen?" Ren frowned. "The water will ripple." Tenzin nodded. "And if I throw another, and another?" Ren thought for a moment. "The ripples will spread, the surface will be disturbed. The reflections will shatter." Tenzin tossed the stone into the water. Ripples spread outward, distorting the calm. "This is what happens when you speak of your plans before they are complete. Every word is a stone cast into the minds of others. Some will admire your idea. Others will question it. Some will try to change it. A few may even work against it. But the more you speak, the more the water stirs. And when the time comes to act, what should have been clear and still is now clouded with noise." Ren looked at the ripples, his excitement fading into quiet understanding. Tenzin continued, "A seed does not announce itself before it grows. It breaks through the soil only when it is ready. The strongest trees grow in silence, the deepest. Rivers move without sound. When you have a plan, act upon it, but do not waste your breath seeking approval. Let your results be your voice." Ren lowered his gaze, realizing his mistake. He had been more concerned with recognition than with the work itself. He had sought praise before he had built anything worth praising. From that day forward, Ren worked in silence. He laid the foundation for the irrigation system with his own hands. He gathered materials without boasting of his efforts. And when months later the fields flourished and the monastery thrived, the villagers came not to praise a young man's idea, but to marvel at the work that had simply been done. A plan spoken too soon is like a candle in the wind, easily extinguished. Before it can burn bright, move quietly, build in silence, let the world see your success, not hear your intentions. There was a time when Master Tenzin was not yet a master. As a young monk, he traveled from village to village, seeking wisdom from teachers of all paths. But no matter where he went, he encountered the same question. "Why do you live this way?" Some asked with curiosity, others with skepticism, and a few with open disdain. The world was full of men who sought wealth, power, and recognition. Yet here was Tenzin, owning nothing, carrying nothing, asking for nothing. To many, it made no sense. One evening after a long journey, Tenzin arrived at a grand estate where a wealthy merchant offered him shelter for the night. As they sat by the fire, the merchant studied him with narrowed eyes. "Young monk," he said, "I have seen many like you. You leave behind comfort and security, yet for what? You dress in rags when you could wear fine robes. You walk for miles when you could ride in a carriage. You eat only what is given to you when you could feast at a full table. What is it that you are trying to prove?" Tenzin smiled. "I am proving nothing," he said. "I am only living as I am." The merchant scoffed. "But why make life difficult for yourself? If you dressed and spoke as others do, if you followed the ways of the world, you would be respected. You could influence people. You could make a difference." Tenzin reached toward the fire and picked up a small clay cup. He held it out to the merchant. "What do you see?" "A cup," the merchant said. Tenzin turned the cup in his hands. "And if I were to paint it gold, would it still be a cup?" "Yes," the merchant said. "And if I were to carve patterns into it, encrust it with jewels, would it still be a cup?" "Yes," the merchant repeated. Tenzin smiled and set the cup down. and yet none of those things would make it hold more water than it does now. The merchant fell silent. Tenzin continued, his voice soft but certain. The world tells us we must change, that we must shape ourselves to fit its expectations. It tells us to be louder, to be wealthier, to be more like those who are praised. But no matter what mask we wear, no matter what titles we chase, we are still only what we are. The cup does not need gold to fulfill its purpose, nor do I. The merchant looked at Tenzin for a long moment, then nodded, saying nothing more. The next morning, as Tenzin prepared to leave, the merchant stopped him at the gate. "You are unlike any man I have met," he admitted, "and for that I respect you." Tenzin bowed. "Not because I am different," he said, "but because I am not afraid to be. A man who bends himself to please the world will never be free. A man who stands firm in who he is will never be controlled. Be as you are, without apology, and the world will either accept you or step aside. Either way, you remain whole." As the years passed, Master Tenzin's presence became a quiet legend. He had never ruled a kingdom, never commanded an army, never sought power or wealth. Yet, wherever he went, people listened, not because he demanded it, but because his presence alone was enough to shift the energy of a room. He had faced anger without reacting, and in doing so made his enemies powerless. He had carried himself with quiet confidence, and because of that, he had commanded respect without ever asking for it. He had let his actions speak instead of his words, and because of that, his influence endured long after he had moved on. He had refused to be provoked by insults, and in doing so, had robbed them of their power. He had kept his true thoughts and plans guarded, revealing only what was necessary, and because of that he remained beyond manipulation. He had worked in silence, built in silence, moved in silence, and when his results spoke for him, there was nothing left to argue. And through it all, he had never once apologized for being exactly who he was. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, an old friend asked him, "Tenzin, you have walked through life without armor, without weapons, without armies. And yet you have never been defeated. What is your secret?" Tenzin smiled, watching the last light fade into the horizon. "I never played their game," he said simply. "The world teaches us to fight for control, to seek validation, to react to every challenge, to prove ourselves at every turn. But true power is not found in dominance. It is found in stillness, in the ability to walk through fire without being burned, to move through chaos without losing yourself, to remain unshaken no matter what storms come your way." In today's world, where noise is mistaken for strength and attention is mistaken for influence, the lesson of Master Tenzin is more important than ever. People will try to provoke you. Let them. People will demand that you explain yourself. You do not have to. People will try to manipulate, control, and shape you into something that fits their expectations. Stand firm. Be like the deep river that moves without sound. Be like the mountain that does not bow to the wind. Be like the flame that does not flicker at every passing breath. And when the world finally sees that you cannot be moved, it will have no choice but to respect you. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on where you place your energy. Are you wasting it on proving yourself to those who do not matter? Are you letting others dictate your emotions, your path, your worth? Or will you step back, master yourself, and become truly untouchable? If you found wisdom in these words, consider supporting this channel by subscribing. Your presence here means everything. Let's continue this journey together, one step closer to a life of strength, stillness, and true inner power.